Hey, friends. Welcome to the Divorce Clarity Studio on WGSNDB Going Solo Network Radio, Podcasts, and TV. I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. I'm also a divorced mom and former lawyer with a master's in Jewish education and spiritual counseling. My goal is to provide you with tools to become the leader of your own divorce team. In every episode, I highlight experts who have their own divorce experiences, both professional and personal. My goal is to raise up stories that let you feel seen, give you inspiration to move forward, and foster the courage to stand on your own 2 feet. Ultimately, the Divorce Clarity Studio is here to help you feel less alone, more informed, and more aligned with your values. Today, I'm excited to welcome mediator David Fine. David is a certified divorce and family law mediator. He helps spouses and families navigate the complexities of divorce through a collaborative lens. As founder of Fine Legal Solutions, David utilizes an empowering, empathetic, and holistic framework designed to facilitate constructive dialogue and mutual understanding. With a focus on minimizing the emotional and financial costs of divorce, David's process is rooted in transparency and cost effectiveness. He helps people feel seen during a moment in their lives when everything seems challenging and unpredictable. David, welcome to the Divorce Clarity Studio.
It's great to be here, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. Now, I start all of my interviews with the same opening question. What's your story and how or why did you get into this particular business?
So my story is kind of interesting. First and foremost, I went through divorce myself and actually used mediation. But that's not really directly how I got into it, but it certainly is indirectly. Some years after my divorce was completed, I had asked my mediator to run some spousal maintenance numbers for me because I thought I was going to take a new position. And by the time she had gotten back to me with those new numbers, I had decided against making that move. And then the conversation shifted in a way that I never imagined. It was, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. This was kind of fresh, and I wasn't sure which direction I was going to go. What followed was something I never envisioned for myself, and it was, you ever thought about mediating? And I said, no. And on the other end, the person on the phone said, I think you'd be a phenomenal mediator. Think about it, get back to me. So I thought about it. And what she suggested was, why don't you come in and just watch me do it? Sit on the couch, be a fly on the wall. And so I came in on a Saturday, watched a fairly heated and high conflict mediation. And I was just amazed with the power of mediation and how it kept the parties sort of focused on what was important, even though there was a lot of conflict. And I said to myself, yeah, I could do this. And so the following Monday, I showed up for work, and that began my journey as a mediator a little over 3 years ago.
That's amazing. It's a great story. So what I really want to know is, what was it about that mediation process, that first mediation, that shifted your perspective to see mediation in a different light?
I think having gone through it myself, and I think this is common for many in divorce, I often describe it as being in a fog. And when I was in my own process, I was definitely in a fog. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just wanted to get done, wanted to minimize conflict, etc. And I don't think I really appreciated it at the time. Over time, I saw the power of it. I saw how it helped my family. I saw how it helped me and how it helps transition us into this, family 2.0. And I think it helped the healing process. I really do. And so as I took a step back, reflected on my own career path, and was contemplating, do I do this or do I not? I was reminded both personally, and I saw in that example professionally, how it can really help couples move forward in a way that's both compassionate, it's empathetic, it's collaborative, it's learning how to communicate, which many times in a marriage, is a challenge. And therefore, why would you expect it to be any better when you're co-parenting? So the ability to work with people and to teach them and to bring my personal experience to that was something that was very intriguing to me and exciting. And that sort of launched my foray into divorce mediation.
So I love how you shared that you were impressed with how going through mediation changed the next chapters of your life. What would you say it was about what happens in the mediation room that can shift the trajectory of the next chapter?
I think it's almost akin to like therapy or couples therapy, or marriage counselors. What I think I learned from that, which, we're never too old to learn lessons, right? Was the ability to listen and the ability to also feel heard. Those are two sides of the same coin, but they're both really important to relationships in general, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a significant other, whether it's a parent child relationship, just knowing that one, you feel heard, even if maybe that's by the mediator, but a good mediator is going to make sure the other person hears that, use their tools to sort of communicate that in a way that is in part soothing and part sort of validating and acknowledging. And I think we all want to be acknowledged. We all want to be heard in our own way. And that was the thing for me that I think taught me some skills that I needed, that I still needed, and helped me, I think become a better person.
Yeah. Wow. So that's a lot. So what you share is that your own divorce experience through mediation shifted things for you. It didn't start you on the journey to become a mediator until something else happened in your life, and then you explored what that could look like. And you saw an expert in the mediation space work with a couple to get through some of these really hard disagreements or
Mhm.
positional experiences. And you saw that the right mediator with the right tone and the right listening ability can actually hear what's underneath all the noise and emotion and posturing. Did I get that right?
You got that right. I mean, I think it's one of the beauties of mediation, or one of the skills of a good mediator is being an active listener and asking questions and follow-up questions and unpacking things. And I think if you take the time to listen, you find out interesting things. And if you take the time to ask the questions, you find out interesting things, and you can really get at the source of really why something is important to someone, and or why someone feels strongly about, you know, this heirloom or that heirloom or this toaster that you can't
Yeah.
decide who's going to take. And it really is a unique skill that is good and is healing. And I think it is something that I took away personally from it, but it's something that I try to impart on my clients is, this listening part and hearing what's important to the other side, and asking how someone feels about that, right? And asking them to react to that. So it's about dialogue, it's about give and take, it's about how you say things, how you communicate with someone who is important to you.
Or really to get them to agree to things, get them, force them.
Yeah.
And how do you shift people's perspective to understand what the role of the mediator really is?
Sure, I think it's really important to be clear about the role of the mediator because it is not something that is well understood. And so when I conduct my sort of initial intakes or conversations with an individual, it's usually an individual, not the husband and wife together. It's usually one person who sort of initiates the inquiry. And, I explain my role, and my role is one of facilitator. The mediation process is voluntary. I have no authority whatsoever to impose decisions. I have no authority to force people to agree. I am there as a listener and as a facilitator, helping clients come up with their own solutions based upon insights on what's required, what are the options. Maybe I get a question if they're stuck. How have other couples addressed a similar situation, David? And then I can share experiences that I've had with other clients maybe in similar situations. And that's one of the things that I think people don't recognize about the mediation process. When you're in mediation, you can customize and be very specific about the things that are important to you. Whereas if you're in the litigation forum, you're putting that decision in the hands of a judge who doesn't know you, a judge who doesn't know your family, a judge who doesn't know what you like and what you don't like. A judge who knows very little about you is going to impose that upon you. And so I always give that example to clients if they're in the deciding mode. Would you rather decide these things yourselves, or would you rather leave it up to a complete stranger? And
Mhm.
of course, when you explain it that way, I think people see then what mediation really is, and it is giving you control of the outcome. And in life, we control many outcomes, but this is one where you can't if you want to, and if you want to explore the power of mediation.
Right. So what is so powerful about that? And if we were going to talk about the ABCs of mediation, A is for agency,
Mhm,
right? What you're
mhm.
saying is that in mediation, couples are enabled to make their own decision about the direction of their lives. They're deciding themselves how they're going to divide things, how they're going to share things. So it's not just about the separating, but it's about how you're going to be within the things you need to do together as you move forward. And when I say that, I'm talking about co parenting. But what you shared about how in divorce, in the litigation process, you're handing over your life for someone else to decide. And in mediation, you get to decide. What I have seen with some of my clients is that they feel, yes, they get to decide, but they also feel like they're afraid they're going to be pressured to make a decision or to agree to something that's not in their best interest. And if they don't have the legal process there to protect their rights, then what do they have?
Yeah, and that is a common concern. You're right. But I think a good mediator is going to help guide them about what is within the bounds of the law. A mediator cannot give legal advice, and I have to be very clear with that because I'm an attorney mediator. And obviously, a non attorney mediator certainly can't give legal advice. So, yes, that is a concern. And in that situation, and I recommend this to all my clients, they don't have to retain legal counsel, at least in Illinois where I live. You can represent yourself before the court and get a divorce. And so, one of the things that I recommend is if you're interested in sort of having another set of eyes and ears on what you're potentially agreeing to in mediation, as you hire an attorney on what they call a limited scope basis. And that attorney can act as like a consultant, can look at the
Mhm.
agreements you reach and can say to you, what? I know that's what you guys agreed to. I don't want to upset your agreement. I just want you to know that, you know, Judge Smith really hates this sort of solution to this issue. He may have a problem with that if you put that before him. That type of advice is instructive and helpful. And I may not possess that knowledge, of course, as the mediator because I haven't practiced before that judge. So,
Right.
having that sort of other set of eyes and ears is a nice check on it and can protect you in that regard. And I think one other point that is worth making about this sort of control of the process is you're more apt to follow that agreement and abide by that agreement if it's an agreement that you came up with, as opposed to one imposed upon you. A lot of
Hmm.
times, you lose in court. That's not a great feeling if in your mind you
Yeah.
lost. And you may not comply with that. You may drag your feet. You may make it more difficult. And that's never a good thing, right? Then it's going to end up in ongoing litigation, ongoing. That's why the agency and having that control really helps for a more lasting and durable agreement as well.
So that's a really great point because everybody who says, but I just want my day in court needs to hear that getting your day in court is not what you imagine it might be. And winning may have repercussions of continuing litigation, which you don't get nearly as frequently when you've mediated an agreement and come to a conclusion together.
One of the beauties of mediation is that if something changes and life changes, right? Life changes and your situation may change. Your kids get older. Verbal agreement or the ability to go back to mediation to modify that agreement is something that's really impactful and something that allows you to pivot and to adjust as routines, priorities, and activities change over time.
And we're back with David Fine of Fine Legal Solutions. David is a mediator, and he's been talking us through the process of mediation and what makes mediation so much more relatable for people going through divorce than litigation, and how having the agency to create your own agreement actually means you're going to stick to it much more frequently than when an order is delivered on high. So, David, let's pick up the conversation where we left off. You used the word durability, the durability of an agreement when it comes through mediation. What does that mean?
So, in my mediations, I speak to the clients about how this agreement, and let's just focus on the parenting piece of it, the parenting agreement. The parenting agreement is a snapshot in time. It's where your lives are today, and you don't know everything that's going to happen in the future. So I always encourage clients, look, this doesn't have to be perfect. This doesn't have to last for 15 years. You can come back to mediation and modify things. Like your kids are going to change. They're going to, get into new activities. They may drop other activities. Once they're teenagers, we all know how much fun that can be. And they're going to have their own minds and their own ideas about schedules and whether you want to be with mom or dad and so forth. And clients leave the door open to modify this agreement if you feel it needs to be modified. The two of you can do that on your own, or you can come back to mediation and we can work it out. And so piece of it on the durability.
Yeah, so I love the piece that you just shared that the two of you can shift the agreement, alter it, without even having to come back to mediation. But if you give yourself a pathway to resolve anticipated conflict, then you're actually, again, more likely to follow that agreement. And you can make people aware that just because the agreement says, disagreements will be resolved by future mediation, it doesn't mean that has to happen. So when people are doing financial calculations in their head, like, I don't want an agreement that says I have to come back and spend more money. Well, no, nobody does. But children change, and parenting and co-parenting agreements need the flexibility to adapt to that. And that's really the work I do with my BE H2O co-parenting, where we are building a system that includes room for change, that includes acknowledgement that when your children grow, they have different needs. So what your 2-year-old needs or your 5-year-old needs is very different than what a 12-year-old and 15-year-old need. And
Exactly.
how you're going to relate to them. Maybe you want to spend less time with them when they're teenagers. Who knows? But today, you can't imagine not waking up with your child in the house. And that is real and present and makes you feel like it's going to be hard to have any kind of shared parenting. But we know, as people who have gone through divorce and people who work in the divorce field, that life happens and we have to adapt and adjust, right?
That's exactly the phrase I use is life happens. And the court has no interest in micromanaging your family. That is not what they're there for. And so they want you to just start living your life. So I tell my clients, I'd love to see you again, but that's okay if I don't. I want to give you the tools to resolve these matters between yourselves going forward. And this is your first step at that. This is trying to shift the mindset of conflict to it's a conversation and we're just adapting and rolling with the punches and, to quote REO Speedwagon, rolling with the changes.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Always love a music reference. Yeah, that's me. Um, what I want people to take away is that mediation gives you agency. Mediation allows you to think of B, what really are the best interests of your kids? What best interests of the child? You had that as a question. What does it mean to put best interests of the children first? So why don't you share your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're thinking about the children and thinking about the alternative, the litigation phase, there's no winning in that. Like winning and losing, I think that's the wrong mindset to have in this. What you're trying to, I mean, if you truly want to put the best interests of your child forward, who better to decide that than the two parents? They know
Yeah.
better than this stranger in a black robe. He doesn't know you. He doesn't know them intimately. Maybe he's heard a snippet or two in court. God forbid if you have to get involved with a guardian ad litem or other professional because the two of you can't seem to figure this out. And so, if you truly want to, focus on the best interest, then the two of you can work that out as opposed to, kind of the legal maneuverings to argue your case before a judge. And that way, there are no winners, right? The winner is the child who, has both parents working, collaboratively and collectively to come up with these things. And it's amazing, what that does also to the child's perspective of the
Mm.
relationship between the parents. If they see the parents working this stuff out in a constructive way without fighting and without going to court, wow, that changes their perspective on the notion of the relationship going forward from mom and dad to mom and dad as co-parents. And that's really powerful. And even if you no longer are partners, you can be excellent co-parents. And that's what I want up my clients for.
Yeah. The language I use when I'm working with co parents is that you're not a married couple anymore, but you're in the business of raising your kids. So
That's
now you
right.
have a business relationship. And if this were a business, what are the kinds of decisions you would make that are collaborative, that are really there to foster the interests of the children and not necessarily, well, my time and your time? Not like each party who is part of a business team has
That's
different
right.
responsibilities, and they also have different talents and skills. So acknowledging that, some people are like, well, he never makes the carpool arrangements and she never does this. Well, who's actually better at that job? And if you were in a business, wouldn't you put the person who was better at that job in that role? So that's where, as a mediator, and for me, when I'm doing the co parent coaching, I say, let's take a step back because it's not winning or losing. This is about designing a new operating system for co parenting. And you are in the best scenario to do that when you are in the mediation context. So we got to see collaboration. But one of the things I'm wondering about is
Uh-huh.
when we're talking about collaboration, there's this dream that these are people who can have an easy conversation together and who don't fight. And like, my co parent is a so called narcissist, borderline personality disorder.
Yeah.
How can I possibly mediate with that? So, what do you say to people who bring those issues to you?
When I hear that, I see clearly where, there's still some hurt, there's still some pain, and there's still some maybe lack of belief that this is going to work in mediation because of those thoughts. And what I try to impart is that, look, this is a forum to have very private and very difficult discussions in a way that is, my goal is to take the temperature down on it. My goal is to, again, bring them back to the B, best interests of the child, and work in the C of collaboration in that you're coming up with these solutions together. And mediation allows you to get really creative solutions that you're not going to have a judge come up with. A judge is going to call balls and strikes and is not going to come up with creative solutions. It's just not their role. They have too many other cases. they're just not going to dive in that deep. And so, it's about finding like that middle ground.
Hmm.
And you do that by listening and by hearing what's important to each of them and asking the why. Like, why are you recommending that, you know, John have no overnights with the kid? What is the concern? And airing that concern in a safe space and then having a conversation about it and letting that sink in, letting the other person digest that, react to it on their own timeline. They don't have to do it right now. Sometimes that's a good time for a break. Let's take a break. Maybe let's go into what they call caucus, which is one on one, where maybe then I sit with, the husband who just heard that. And you could see him being kind of knocked off his chair a little bit. He's hurt, he's upset. And that's a good time for a break. And so you have to recognize that as a mediator, and either with technology where you can put someone in a waiting room, or if you're in person, the ability to go to a different room or a second office or a second conference room really allows the mediator to sort of soothe things over, make sure that someone's all right, make sure they want to continue. Sometimes something comes up in mediation that just sort of, I think we've done enough today and I have to decide whether we should proceed. And that's a hard call, but sometimes it's the right call because you could see that it jarred someone and it's time just to take a break and pick this up next week.
So essentially, what you're saying is the parties really determine the process. So you as a mediator can tell because of your experience when you're hitting a space that it's not going to be productive any longer to go forward. And you also are giving the parties the agency to call it as well. Like, look, I've had enough for today. 2 hours is more than enough time.
Mhm.
I need a break. And that this way they actually can consider everything that's come so far. Like, what have I agreed to? What is hard for me to agree to? And take a breath so that they can go to the balcony in another space, take a
Mhm.
week, and then come back. And
Yeah.
I love that opportunity
Mhm.
because it shows people that their feelings matter, that their concerns are important, and that they're not getting bullied in the room.
Yep.
So we're getting close to the end of time. So
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind, I would love for you to leave my audience with a takeaway of what they should think about when they think about mediation.
Yeah, I think it's really simple. Think about what's important to you. And would you rather design that yourself, or would you rather put that into the hands of someone who doesn't know you or know your family or know your children or know their routines? Mediation is a way to not only get you divorced, which is the short-term goal, right? Whether it's litigation or mediation, the goal is to get divorced. But it doesn't just stop there. And if you want to have an effective, respectful relationship with your former spouse, and let's face it, if you have children, you're going to have graduations and weddings and birthdays and sad occasions, that you're going to share going forward. So why not try to foster that relationship as best as it can be, not only for you and your former spouse, but for your children if there's children
Yeah.
involved. And mediation, hands down, is going to be a much more healing and positive process to get divorced and to succeed in family 2.0 than going
Hmm.
through the litigation phase. So please, before you call your lawyer, call a mediator. Just understand the options. And I think most, when provided with the information and having the tools to make that decision in an informed way, are going to choose the less, acrimonious, the less conflict laden process to get divorced.
Yeah, I love that because really it's what is the cost of the conflict? Like in litigation, you fire up and the cost of conflict gets higher and higher and higher, both literally and figuratively.
Correct.
And when you go into mediation, you reduce the cost of conflict because your mindset is coming from a place like I'm here to reach agreement. And there may be things I'm not going to go below, but I am here because I want us to do this in a way that we can continue to have some kind of relationship after. So, how can my audience get in touch with you? And what audiences do you serve? What communities?
So I live and work in suburban Chicago. So I serve all the Chicagoland region and all the neighboring counties. Mediation is something that I can do across state lines. And I have found, though, that most people want a mediator who's well versed in that state, whether they're a lawyer or non-lawyer. They just want someone who knows their state. So it's like the Tip O'Neill phrase, all politics is local. And I think that's very true in choosing a mediator. But I'd love to
Mhm.
talk to you even if you're not in my jurisdiction. And they can reach me via telephone. My phone number's area code 312-446-2882, or via email, a very simple email address, david@finelegal.com. And that's FEIN, the word legal.com. And I'd love to chat with you.
Okay, thank you so much, David. It was a pleasure having you on today. And I'd love to hear about some of your interesting and complicated cases because I know you have them, and how you solve what may seem like an intractable problem is really something that I think people need to hear about and see. So, thanks again. For my audience, thank you for listening. You can find me at www.lzlcoaching.com. Email me, lisa@lzlcoaching.com, or find me on Instagram, Divorce Coach Lisa. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.